The rain hammered against the cracked concrete of the abandoned overpass, each drop finding its way through the makeshift cardboard shelter that Kale called home. At 14 years old, he had learned that the universe rarely offered mercy to those who needed it most. His stomach cramped with familiar hunger pangs as he pulled his threadbare jacket tighter around his skeletal frame. The year was 2387, and humanity had long since joined the Galactic Council. Earth was now a gleaming metropolis of crystal spires and floating platforms, where the wealthy lived in climate-controlled luxury while the forgotten scraped by in the shadows below. Kale belonged to the forgotten. He had been on the streets since he was 10, when the automated systems had declared his parents economically inefficient and relocated them to a distant mining colony. Children without proper documentation slipped through the cracks of even the most advanced civilization. The social services were overwhelmed, and one more homeless human child was barely a statistic. Through the steady drumming of rain, Kale heard something unusual, a soft, pitiful whimpering that sounded almost like a wounded animal. His first instinct was to ignore it. He had learned the hard way that investigating strange sounds in the Undercity usually led to trouble. But the sound came again, weaker this time, and something about it tugged at what remained of his compassion. Crawling out from his cardboard sanctuary, Kale followed the sound deeper into the maze of support beams and abandoned construction equipment. The whimpering grew louder as he approached a pile of twisted metal debris. There, wedged between two fallen concrete slabs, was something that made his breath catch in his throat. It was clearly alien, but unlike anything he had seen in the public broadcasts about the various species in the Galactic Council. The creature was roughly the size of a large cat, covered in scales that shifted between deep purple and silver, depending on the angle of the dim light filtering down from above. It had 4 legs ending in delicate claws, a long, sinuous tail, and, most remarkably, a pair of translucent wings folded against its back. The creature's breathing was labored, and one of its wings appeared to be trapped under a piece of rebar. Its large, intelligent eyes fixed on Kale with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Those eyes were an impossible shade of violet, with an inner light that seemed almost magical. Kale knew he should walk away. Whatever this creature was, it didn't belong in the Undercity of Earth. It was probably valuable, and if the wrong people found out he had discovered it, they would want to know where. He had survived 4 years on the streets by minding his own business and staying invisible. But as he looked at the trapped creature, he saw something of himself in those frightened eyes. Another being alone and helpless, abandoned by a universe that didn't care whether it lived or died. "Hey there," Kale whispered softly, crouching down but keeping his distance. The creature flinched at his voice, but didn't try to flee. "You're hurt pretty bad, aren't you?" The creature made a soft, trilling sound that might have been an attempt at communication. Kale had picked up fragments of various alien languages during his time on the streets, but this was unlike anything he had heard before. Still, the tone seemed to convey pain and exhaustion. Moving slowly, Kale examined the debris pinning the creature's wing. The rebar was heavy, but not impossibly so. However, moving it incorrectly could cause more damage to the already injured wing. Kale had learned basic first aid from an old medic who sometimes shared his shelter space during the worst winter months. The man had been kicked out of the military medical corps for drinking, but he knew how to treat wounds. "Okay, little one," Kale murmured, using the same gentle tone he had heard the medic use with injured people. "I'm going to try to help you, but you need to stay very still." He positioned himself carefully and began to work at shifting the smaller pieces of debris first. Each movement was deliberate and cautious. The creature watched him with those remarkable eyes, and Kale could swear he saw intelligence there, perhaps even understanding. As he worked, Kale found himself talking to the creature, partly to keep it calm and partly to fill the oppressive silence of the Undercity. "You know, I've been living down here for 4 years now, and I've never seen anything like you. The council species we see on the news feeds are all pretty different from humans, but you're something else entirely. The creature made another soft trill, this one sounding less distressed. Kale took it as encouragement and continued his careful work. I bet you're not supposed to be here, are you? This doesn't exactly look like natural habitat for something with wings like yours. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, Kale managed to free the creature's wing. The appendage was clearly damaged, with several tears in the delicate membrane, but it didn't appear to be broken. The creature tried to stretch the wing experimentally and made a pain sound. Yeah, that's going to need some treatment, Kale said, sitting back on his heels. Good thing the old medic taught me a few things. He carefully gathered the creature into his arms, surprised by how light it was despite its size. The scales felt warm and smooth under his touch, and he could feel the rapid flutter of what he assumed was the creature's heart. It didn't resist being picked up, which Kale took as either a sign of trust or complete exhaustion. Carrying the creature back to his shelter, Kale tried to process what he was getting himself into. He had barely enough food and water to keep himself alive. Adding another mouth to feed, even a small one, was probably a death sentence for both of them. The smart thing to do would be to report the creature to the authorities and hope for a small finder's fee. But as he looked down at the creature nestled trustingly in his arms, Kale knew he couldn't do it. The authorities would likely hand it over to some corporate research facility where it would spend the rest of its life in a cage being studied. Or worse, they might simply dispose of it as an unregistered alien presence on Earth. Back in his cardboard shelter, Kale carefully set the creature down on his single blanket. It curled up immediately, tucking its head under one wing in what was clearly a sleeping position. The damaged wing remained slightly extended, and Kale could see that the tears were bleeding a silvery fluid. From his meager first aid supplies, Kale pulled out a small bottle of antiseptic and some clean cloth strips. The medic had always emphasized that infection was often more dangerous than the original injury. Working by the light of a salvaged glow stick, Kale carefully cleaned the wounds on the creature's wing. The creature stirred as the antiseptic touched the tears in its wing membrane, but didn't pull away. If anything, it seemed to understand that Kale was trying to help. Once the wounds were clean, Kale used the cloth strips to create a makeshift bandage that would support the damaged wing without restricting movement too severely. There, he said softly when he finished. That should help it heal properly. The creature looked up at him with those extraordinary violet eyes and made a sound that was almost like a purr. Then, it did something that made Kale's breath catch. It extended its good wing and gently touched his hand with the tip, a gesture that felt unmistakably like gratitude. As the creature settled back down to sleep, Kale realized that his world had just changed in a fundamental way. For 4 years, he had survived by thinking only of himself, by being selfish and careful and invisible. But looking at this vulnerable alien being that had somehow found its way into his life, he felt something he had almost forgotten, the desire to protect something other than himself. The rain continued to fall outside their shelter, and somewhere in the distance, the sounds of the city continued their endless cycle. But in the small space under the overpass, a homeless human boy had just made a choice that would echo far beyond anything he could imagine. Kale settled down beside the sleeping creature, pulling his jacket over both of them. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone. Whatever challenges tomorrow would bring, at least he would face them with a companion. As he drifted off to sleep, Kale couldn't know that the creature he had rescued was no ordinary alien. In the vast reaches of space, an ancient and powerful race was searching desperately for their lost prince. The Drakmarian Empire ruled over 17 star systems, and their young were considered more precious than any treasure in the galaxy. The creature sleeping beside a homeless human boy was Prince Zephyr of the Drakmarian royal house, separated from his family during a catastrophic spatial storm that had torn his ship from the dimensional barriers between worlds. The storm had been the work of humanity's greatest enemies, the Void Collective, entities that fed on the life force of entire civilizations. But Prince Zephyr knew none of this yet. He only knew that when he had been most vulnerable and afraid, a strange bipedal being had shown him kindness without asking for anything in return. In the dragon cultures of the Dragmarian Empire, such an act created a bond deeper than blood, stronger than law. And in his dreams, the young prince began to remember fragments of his true nature and the incredible power that flowed in his veins. Power that, when fully awakened, could change the course of the war that was coming to threaten all free civilizations in the galaxy. The rain fell through the night, washing the city clean and preparing the stage for events that would reshape humanity's place among the stars. In the morning, Kale would wake to find that his small act of compassion had begun a chain of events that would eventually place the fate of the entire galaxy in his hands. But for now, a boy and a dragon slept peacefully in the shadows of a world that had forgotten both existed. Kale woke to the sensation of something warm and scaly pressed against his chest. For a moment, he forgot where he was, caught between the lingering wisps of dreams where he had been somewhere safe and warm. Reality crashed back as he felt the dampness of his cardboard shelter and heard the eternal drip of condensation from the overpass above. The creature he had rescued was awake, those remarkable violet eyes studying his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. There was something different about its gaze this morning, more alert and aware than the previous night when pain and exhaustion had dominated. "Good morning," Kale whispered, careful not to move too quickly. He had learned that sudden movements could startle injured animals into hurting themselves further. "How's the wing feeling?" The creature made a soft, trilling sound and carefully extended the bandaged wing. The silvery fluid had stopped leaking, which Kale took as a good sign. The creature flexed the wing experimentally, wincing slightly, but managing to fold it back against its body without too much difficulty. Kale's stomach chose that moment to remind him of his own needs with a loud growl. He hadn't eaten in over 36 hours, and his last meal had been a half-moldy piece of bread scavenged from a dumpster behind one of the upscale restaurants. The creature tilted its head at the sound, and Kale could swear he saw concern in those alien features. "Yeah, I know," Kale said ruefully. "I need to find some food, but first, let me check on your bandages." He carefully unwrapped the cloth strips he had used the night before. The tears in the wing membrane were already showing signs of healing, which seemed impossibly fast. The edges of the wounds had closed significantly, and there was no sign of infection. Kale had never seen anything heal so quickly, not even with the advanced medical technology available to those who could afford it. "That's unusual," he murmured as he rewrapped the wing with fresh cloth. "But good unusual. You might be able to fly again sooner than I thought." As he finished tending to the creature's injuries, Kale found himself studying its features more carefully. In the better light of morning, he could see intricate patterns in its scales, almost like natural tattoos that seemed to shift and change as he watched. The creature was definitely reptilian, but there was something almost regal about its bearing, despite its small size. "I should probably give you a name," Kale said, settling back against the concrete wall of his shelter. "I can't keep calling you creature or little one. You seem too smart for that." The creature made another trill, this one sounding almost like agreement. It moved closer to Kale, settling against his side with a satisfied rumble that reminded him of a cat's purr. "How about Zeph?" Kale suggested. "It sounds kind of exotic, which seems to fit you." The creature's eyes widened, and it made a sharp sound that was almost like surprise. Then it touched Kale's hand with the tip of its snout in what was clearly approval. "Zeph it is then," Kale said with a smile. It was the first time he had smiled in weeks, and it felt strange on his face. "Now, I need to find us some food. The question is whether you can eat human food, or if I need to find something more specific to your diet." Zeph tilted his head and made a questioning trill. Then, in a gesture that shocked Kale to his core, the small dragon opened his mouth and spoke. The words were heavily accented and slightly slurred, but unmistakably English. "Hungry, yes. Food together." Kale stared at the creature in shock. In all the news feeds about the various alien species in the Galactic Council, he had never heard of one that could speak human languages so quickly. Most required specialized translation devices or extensive education to communicate with humans. "You can talk," Kale said stupidly. "How long have you been able to talk?" Zeph's expression seemed almost embarrassed. Words coming back. Memory pieces. Not sure how. The broken speech suggested that Zeph was remembering rather than learning, which raised a host of new questions. What kind of creature was he? Where had he come from? And why was he alone in Earth's Undercity? "Okay," Kale said, deciding that those questions could wait. "Let's focus on food first. Can you eat the same things humans eat?" Zeph nodded enthusiastically. "Yes. Many foods. Meat good. Fruit good. Bread okay." Kale laughed to spite himself. "Well, you're in luck then, because that's about all I can usually find down here." He gathered his few possessions and carefully helped Zeph to his feet. The dragon was steadier than he had been the night before, though he still favored his injured wing. Together, they ventured out from the shelter into the maze of the Undercity. The Undercity was a world unto itself, built in the spaces between the foundations of the gleaming metropolis above. Here, the forgotten and discarded made their homes in the shadows of humanity's greatest achievements. Automated systems delivered food scraps and recycled water to designated distribution points, but competition for resources was fierce. Kale knew the rhythms of the place like a song. The best dumpsters were emptied at specific times, the security patrols followed predictable routes, and the other inhabitants had their own territories and unspoken rules. He had survived by being small, quick, and careful never to take more than his share. But traveling with Zeph changed everything. The dragon attracted attention wherever they went. Other homeless individuals stopped their activities to stare, some with curiosity, others with the calculating look of people who saw potential profit. Kale kept his head down and tried to move quickly, but he could feel eyes following them. They reached one of Kale's usual scavenging spots, a service alley behind a cluster of restaurants that catered to the mid-level bureaucrats and corporate employees. The dumpsters here usually contained decent scraps, thrown away not because they were spoiled, but because they didn't meet the aesthetic standards of the establishment's clientele. Kale was rummaging through a promising container when he heard voices approaching. He froze, recognizing the harsh tones of Marcus and his gang. Marcus was one of the Undercity's predators, a man who had given up any pretense of civilization and ruled his territory through violence and intimidation. His gang preyed on the weaker inhabitants, taking their food, their shelter, and sometimes their lives. "Look what we have here," Marcus said as he rounded the corner with 3 of his followers. "Little Kale," and he's found himself a pet. Kale slowly turned to face the gang, keeping his body between them and Zeph. Marcus was a large man, scarred from countless fights, with the dead eyes of someone who had stopped seeing other people as anything more than obstacles or resources. His followers were cut from the same cloth, desperate people who had chosen to survive by becoming predators themselves. "It's nothing, Marcus," Kale said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Just something I found injured. I was going to turn it in to the authorities." Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Oh, I don't think so, boy. That little creature looks valuable. Real valuable. And you know the rules down here. Anything valuable gets shared with the community." By community, Marcus meant himself and his gang. Kale had seen what happened to people who try to hold out against Marcus. They usually ended up beaten bloody and left with nothing but their lives if they were lucky. "I found it fair," Kale said, hating how small his voice sounded. "It was hurt and trapped. I helped it. And that was real nice of you," Marcus said, taking a step forward. His hand rested on the crude knife he kept at his belt. "Real humanitarian. But now you're going to hand it over, and maybe we'll let you keep a small finder's fee." Kale felt Zeph press closer to his leg, and he could sense the dragon's fear and confusion. Zeph didn't understand the dynamics at play here, the unspoken violence that governed the Undercity's social structure. All he knew was that the human who had helped him was in danger. "Please, Marcus," Kale said, trying one last time to avoid violence. "He's injured. He needs medical attention. If you take him now, he might die." Marcus shrugged. "Dead or alive, exotic aliens are worth good money to the right buyers. Hand him over, boy." Kale looked down at Zeph, meeting those trusting violet eyes. The dragon was counting on him for protection, just as Kale had once counted on adults who had ultimately failed him. The smart thing to do would be to hand Zeph over and hope Marcus kept his word about the finder's fee. It would mean food for days, maybe even weeks. But as he looked at Zeph's frightened face, Kale realized he couldn't do it. He had spent 4 years surviving by being selfish, by putting his own needs first. But this time was different. This time, he had someone who depended on him, someone who trusted him to do the right thing. "No," Kale said quietly. "I won't let you take him." Marcus's expression darkened. "Wrong answer, boy." The gang leader lunged forward, reaching for Zeph. Kale threw himself between them, catching Marcus's arm and trying to hold him back. He was no match for the larger man's strength, but desperation gave him energy he didn't know he possessed. That was when Zeph spoke, and his voice carried a power that made the air itself vibrate with authority. "Stop!" The single word hit Marcus like a physical blow, sending him stumbling backward. The dragon's eyes had begun to glow with an inner light, and the scales on his body were shifting from purple to a brilliant gold. The temperature in the alley rose noticeably, and there was a smell in the air like lightning and spice. "What the hell?" Marcus started to say, but his words were cut off as Zeph took a step forward. Though still small, the dragon now radiated an unmistakable sense of power and danger. His voice, when he spoke again, was clearer and stronger than before. "You will not harm the one who showed kindness to the lost. You will leave this place and not return." Marcus reached for his knife, but his hand froze halfway to the weapon. The glow in Zeph's eyes intensified, and suddenly the gang leader was backing away, his followers close behind him. "This isn't over," Marcus snarled, but there was real fear in his voice now. "Whatever that thing is, it doesn't belong here. And neither do you if you're harboring it." The gang retreated, but Kale could see the calculation in Marcus's eyes. The man was already planning his next move, probably involving more people and better weapons. They wouldn't have long before Marcus returned with reinforcements. As soon as the gang was gone, Zeph collapsed against Kale's leg, the golden glow fading from his scales. The effort of whatever he had done had clearly exhausted him, and he was trembling with fatigue. "What was that?" Kale asked, kneeling beside his friend. "What did you do to them?" Zeph's voice was weak but steady. "Dragons have power, authority, but using it costs much. Not ready yet." "Dragons?" Kale repeated. "You're a dragon? Like in the old Earth stories." Zeph managed a tired nod. "Dragons real, just not from Earth." Memory coming back slowly. "I am." He paused, as if struggling with something. "I am Zephyr, Prince Zephyr." The words hit Kale like a physical blow. A prince. He had rescued and been caring for royalty, and he hadn't even known it. Suddenly, Marcus's interest made more sense. If word got out that there was dragon royalty in the Undercity, every criminal organization in the sector would be scrambling to get their hands on him. "We need to get out of here," Kale said urgently. "If Marcus comes back with more people, your dragon power might not be enough to stop them." Zephyr nodded weakly. "Yes, but where?" "I do not know this world." Kale thought quickly. The Undercity was vast, with countless hiding places, but Marcus had connections throughout the area. They needed somewhere safe, somewhere Marcus wouldn't think to look. "I know a place," Kale said finally, "but it's dangerous to get there. And once we're there, we'll be completely on our own." "Better than here," Zephyr said simply. "You saved my life. I trust you to save it again." The simple faith in those words struck Kale deeply. Here was a being of obvious power and royal blood, trusting a homeless human boy with his life. It was a responsibility unlike anything Kale had ever faced, and it terrified him. But As he helped Zephyr to his feet and began to plan their escape route, Kale felt something else: purpose. For the first time in years, his life meant something beyond mere survival. He had someone depending on him, and he would not let them down. As they slipped deeper into the shadows of the Undercity, neither of them could know that their actions had already triggered events across the galaxy. Deep in space, the Drakmarian Empire's search fleets had detected the brief flare of Prince Zephyr's power, confirming that their lost heir was alive. And in the dark spaces between the stars, the Void Collective stirred, sensing through their ancient network of spies and servants that their greatest enemy's son had survived their attack and found an ally among the humans they planned to devour. The war for the galaxy's future had begun with a homeless boy's act of kindness, and soon the entire cosmos would tremble at the consequences of one human's refusal to abandon a friend in need. The abandoned subway tunnel stretched ahead of them like the throat of some enormous beast, its walls slick with moisture and covered in the luminescent fungi that had adapted to life in Earth's forgotten places. Kale moved carefully through the ankle-deep water, supporting Zephyr as the young dragon struggled to keep pace on his still healing wing. They had been traveling for 3 hours, following maintenance passages and forgotten utility corridors that most people didn't even know existed. Kale had learned these routes during his darkest period on the streets, when he had been so desperate to avoid the other inhabitants of the Undercity that he had risked the dangerous automated systems and unstable structures of the deepest levels. "How much further?" Zephyr asked, his voice tight with exhaustion. The dragon's recovery had been remarkable, but using his power against Marcus had taken a significant toll. "Not far now," Kale replied, though he wasn't entirely sure himself. It had been over a year since he had last visited the place he was taking them to, and he could only hope it was still safe. "There's a chamber up ahead where the old transit system used to have a maintenance depot. It's been sealed off for decades, but there's a way in if you know where to look." They pressed on through the darkness, guided by Kale's salvaged glow stick and an occasional bioluminescent patch of fungus. The sound of their movement echoed strangely in the confined space, and Kale found himself listening constantly for any sign that they were being followed. Marcus wouldn't give up easily. A dragon prince would be worth more money than the gang leader could make in a lifetime of predation. More importantly, Marcus's reputation depended on maintaining control over his territory. Allowing a homeless boy to defy him would invite challenges from other gangs and ambitious individuals within his own ranks. "Kale," Zephyr said suddenly, his voice carrying a note of urgent warning. "Something approaches. Behind us." Kale froze, straining to hear over the constant drip and echo of the tunnel. At first, there was nothing. Then, faintly, he caught the sound of multiple footsteps splashing through the water, still distant but definitely getting closer. "How many?" Kale whispered. Zephyr's head tilted, his enhanced senses focused on the approaching threat. 6, maybe 7. Moving fast. They have artificial lights. Marcus had brought reinforcements, and they were closing in. Kale's mind raced as he calculated distances and options. The chamber he was heading for was still at least 15 minutes away, and that was if they moved at full speed. Zephyr couldn't maintain that pace in his current condition, and they would be caught in the open tunnel with nowhere to hide. "This way," Kale said urgently, pulling Zephyr toward a narrow side passage he had almost missed. "It's a maintenance shaft. It'll be tight, but it connects to another tunnel system." They squeezed into the narrow opening just as the first glow of pursuit lights began to reflect off the tunnel walls behind them. The shaft was barely wide enough for Kale's shoulders, and Zephyr had to fold his wings tightly against his body to fit. They moved as quickly and quietly as possible, trying to ignore the claustrophobic press of walls and ceiling. The shaft opened into another tunnel system, this one even older and more decrepit than the last. Here, the walls were lined with corroded pipes and ancient electrical conduits that sparked occasionally with residual power. The air was thick with chemical fumes from industrial processes that had been abandoned decades ago. They won't follow us through there, Kale said with relief as they emerged from the maintenance shaft. Marcus is too big, and his people are too smart to risk getting stuck in unknown passages. But his relief was short-lived. As they rounded a bend in the tunnel, they found their way blocked by a heavy metal security door marked with radiation warnings and biohazard symbols. The door was sealed with multiple locks and electronic security devices, clearly designed to keep people out of whatever lay beyond. Dead end, Zephyr observed, though he didn't sound as concerned as Kale felt. Not necessarily, Kale said, examining the security panel beside the door. The electronics were old, probably installed sometime in the late 23rd century when the tunnel system was first built. These old security systems were designed to be fail-safes. They lock down in emergencies, but they usually have manual overrides for maintenance crews. He began searching the area around the door, looking for hidden panels or backup access points. His fingers finally found a concealed switch behind a loose piece of wall plating. When he pressed it, a small access panel slid open, revealing a mechanical lock mechanism. Got it, Kale said with satisfaction. Now I just need to... He trailed off as he realized what the manual override required. A biometric scanner, specifically designed to read human DNA patterns. What is wrong? Zephyr asked, sensing Kale's frustration. It needs a DNA sample from an authorized person, Kale explained. Probably maintenance staff or emergency personnel. I don't exactly qualify. Zephyr moved closer to examine the scanner. His violet eyes studied the device with intense concentration, and Kale could almost see the gears turning in the dragon's mind. Perhaps, Zephyr said slowly, but you forget what I am. Dragon magic is not just about power and authority. We are also creatures of knowledge and understanding. He placed one delicate claw against the biometric scanner. Allow me. What happened next defied everything Kale knew about technology and physics. Golden light flowed from Zephyr's claw into the scanner, and the ancient device began to hum with activity. Data streams flowed across its display, moving too fast for human eyes to follow. I am not hacking your machine, Zephyr explained as he worked. I'm speaking to it. All technology carries the essence of its creators within it. This device remembers the humans who built it, who maintained it, who trusted their lives to its protection. I am simply asking it to remember that trust. The scanner chimed acceptance, and the massive security door began to grind open. Beyond it lay a chamber that took Kale's breath away. It was vast, easily the size of several city blocks, with a vaulted ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. But what made it truly remarkable were the contents. Row upon row of vehicles filled the space, but not just any vehicles. These were emergency response craft from Earth's early days in the Galactic Council. Atmospheric fighters, rescue shuttles, and exploration vessels that had been designed to operate in hostile alien environments. Most were covered in dust and clearly hadn't been used in decades, but they appeared to be in remarkable condition. This is incredible, Kale whispered as they entered the chamber. I had no idea this place existed. Zephyr's expression was odd as well, but for different reasons. These machines, he said softly, they carry the dreams of your species, the hope to reach beyond your world and take your place among the stars. There is great beauty in such ambition. They made their way deeper into the chamber, looking for a safe place to rest and plan their next moves. Kale found what he was looking for in the form of a maintenance office built into one wall of the chamber. It had its own power supply and environmental controls, and more importantly, it was defensible. Inside the office, they found emergency food supplies, water purification tablets, and even some basic medical equipment. It was better equipped than anywhere Kale had lived since his parents' disappearance. We should be safe here, Kale said as he activated the office's security systems. The door we came through will reseal automatically, and there's no other obvious way in. Marcus and his people won't be able to find us. Zephyr nodded, but his expression was troubled. Safety is good, but we cannot hide forever. My people will be searching for me, and their enemies will be searching as well. Remaining hidden may only delay the inevitable confrontation. Your people? Kale asked. Tell me about them. About where you come from. Zephyr settled himself on one of the office's chairs, his tail curled around his feet in what Kale was beginning to recognize as a comfortable position. The Drakmarian Empire spans 17 star systems, he began. We are an old race, older than most of the species in your Galactic Council. For millennia, we have served as protectors and guardians of younger civilizations. He paused, his eyes growing distant with memory. My father, Emperor Valerian, rules with wisdom and strength. My mother, Empress Seraphina, commands our greatest battle fleets. They must be frantic with worry when a spatial storm struck our ship. Spatial storm? Kale prompted when Zephyr trailed off. Not natural, Zephyr said grimly. The work of our greatest enemies, the Void Collective. They are parasites that feed on life energy, consuming entire worlds to fuel their hunger. They have been testing our defenses for years, probing for weaknesses. The dragon's expression grew grim. They found one. My ship was carrying new trade agreements with several council species. If they captured those documents, they would know exactly which systems are vulnerable to attack. Kale felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's atmosphere. You're saying there might be an invasion coming? More than that, Zephyr replied. The Void Collective doesn't just conquer worlds. They drain them completely, leaving nothing but dead rock floating in space. If they succeed in breaking through our defenses, billions of lives will be lost. The weight of that revelation settled over Kale like a physical burden. He had thought he was simply helping an injured creature, but instead, he had become entangled in events that could determine the fate of entire civilizations. What do we do? Kale asked. I'm nobody. Just a homeless kid who doesn't even officially exist according to Earth's databases. How can I possibly help stop something like this? Zephyr looked at him with those remarkable violet eyes, and Kale saw something there that surprised him. Respect. You underestimate yourself, the dragon said. In the short time I have known you, you have shown more courage and compassion than many beings who rule star systems. You risked your own safety to help a stranger, you defended me against superior numbers, and you brought us to safety using knowledge and resourcefulness I could never have matched. Zephyr stood and moved to one of the office windows that looked out over the chamber full of sleeping spacecraft. Moreover, you are human. Your species may be young in galactic terms, but you have something most older races have lost, the ability to act without calculating the consequences, to do what is right simply because it is right. That sounds like a polite way of saying we're reckless, Kale said with a weak smile. Perhaps, Zephyr admitted, but sometimes recklessness is exactly what the universe needs. My people, for all our power and wisdom, have become cautious. We plan carefully, we consider all options. We weigh every risk. But the Void Collective doesn't fight that kind of war. They strike fast and hard, overwhelming defenses through sheer audacity. The dragon turned back to Kale. To defeat them, we may need to think like humans, to take risks that seem impossible, to find solutions that no one else would consider. Before Kale could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the chamber. Emergency lights flashed red, and a computerized voice echoed from speakers throughout the facility. Security breach detected. Unknown vessels approaching perimeter. All personnel report to emergency stations. Through the office window, Kale could see lights moving in the darkness above the chamber. Ships were descending through concealed openings in the ceiling, their hulls gleaming with an otherworldly light that made his skin crawl. Void Collective? He asked, though he already knew the answer from Zephyr's horrified expression. How did they find us so quickly? Zephyr wondered aloud. Then, his eyes widened with understanding. They've been tracking me. When I used my power against the gang leader, I must have given away our position. The ships settling into the chamber were unlike anything in the databases of known council species. They were organic-looking, all flowing curves and pulsing lights as if they had been grown rather than built. Dark shapes were already emerging from their hulls, moving with a fluid grace that suggested they weren't entirely bound by normal physics. "We need to run," Kale said urgently. "Is there another way out of here?" But even as he asked the question, he could see more ships descending. The chamber was being surrounded, and their enemies moved with the coordination of a well-planned operation. This wasn't a random encounter. It was a carefully executed trap. "No," Zephyr said quietly. "Running will not help us now. They have found me, and they will not stop until they have what they came for." The dragon's scales began to shift from their normal purple to the brilliant gold of his battle form, and power flowed around him like visible heat. "But perhaps it is time to stop hiding from what I am." Kale watched in amazement as his small companion began to change. Zephyr's form expanded, growing larger and more imposing with each passing second. His wings spread wide, the damaged membrane completely healed and glowing with inner fire. When he spoke again, his voice carried the authority of millennia of royal bloodline. "I am Prince Zephyr of the Dragmurian Empire," he declared, and the words seemed to shake the very foundations of the chamber. "And I will not be taken by creatures of shadow and hunger." The final battle for their freedom was about to begin, and Kale realized that the scared, injured creature he had rescued was about to reveal himself as one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. But power alone might not be enough. To survive what was coming, they would need everything that made humanity special: ingenuity, determination, and the willingness to risk everything for those who mattered. As the Void Collective's forces prepared to attack, Kale found himself standing beside a dragon prince, ready to face an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries. It was insane, it was hopeless, and it was exactly the kind of impossible situation where humans tended to surprise everyone, including themselves. The Void Collective forces moved across the chamber floor like liquid darkness given form. Kale had seen alien species before in the news feeds, but these creatures defied every assumption about how life should exist. They flowed rather than walked, their bodies shifting between solid and ethereal states as they advanced. Where they passed, the metal floor corroded and the air itself seemed to dim. Prince Zephyr stood transformed in the center of the maintenance office, his form now magnificent and terrible in equal measure. He had grown to nearly twice his previous size, his scales blazing with golden fire, and his eyes held the accumulated power of his ancient bloodline. When he spread his wings, the air shimmered with heat and authority. "Stay behind me," Zephyr commanded, his voice carrying harmonics that Kale could feel in his bones. "These creatures feed on life energy. Direct contact will drain you in seconds." Through the office's reinforced windows, Kale watched the alien ships disgorge more of the shadow creatures. There had to be hundreds of them now, moving in perfect coordination toward their position. But what truly terrified him was their apparent intelligence. These weren't mindless predators. They moved with purpose and strategy. "How do we fight something like that?" Kale asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dragon fire burns in dimensions beyond the physical," Zephyr replied, golden flames beginning to dance around his claws. "It can destroy their connection to this reality. But there are too many, and I'm still recovering my strength." One of the void creatures reached the office door and began to seep through the cracks around the frame. Where it touched the metal, the door began to dissolve as if it were made of sand. Zephyr responded instantly, breathing a stream of golden fire that struck the creature dead center. The effect was immediate and dramatic, the shadow being shrieked in frequencies that human ears couldn't detect, its form unraveling like smoke in a hurricane. But even as it died, more were pressing forward to take its place. "The door won't hold them for long," Kale said, backing toward the rear of the office. And once they get inside, he trailed off as his eyes fell on the maintenance terminal built into the office's back wall. Like everything else in this chamber, it was old but functional, connected to the facility's central computer systems. An idea began to form in his mind, crazy and desperate, but possibly their only chance. "Zephyr," he said urgently, "you said you could speak to machines, make them remember their purpose. What about all of this?" He gestured toward the chamber full of dormant spacecraft. The Dragon Prince followed his gaze, and understanding dawned in his violet eyes. The emergency response fleet. But these ships have been dormant for decades. Their crews are long gone, and their systems are outdated. But they were built to fight alien threats, Kale pressed. That was their whole purpose. And you said yourself that technology carries the essence of its creators. These ships were built by humans who dreamed of defending their world. Another void creature began seeping through the doorframe, and Zephyr incinerated it with a carefully controlled blast of dragon fire. But Kel could see the strain in his friend's movements. Each use of his power was costing him, and there were still hundreds of enemies outside. "It is possible," Zephyr admitted, "but awakening so many ships simultaneously would require enormous power, more than I possess in my current state. What if you didn't have to do it alone?" Kale asked, his hands already flying over the maintenance terminal's controls. "What if you had a human partner, someone who understood these systems on an instinctive level?" The terminal came to life under Kale's touch, displaying schematics and status reports for every vehicle in the chamber. Most of the ships were in standby mode, their systems powered down but intact. More importantly, they were all connected to the chamber's central computer network. "I've been working with human technology my whole life," Kale continued as he navigated through the system architecture. "Scraping power from abandoned circuits, hot wiring security systems, making broken machines work again. It's how I survived on the streets." Zephyr destroyed 2 more void creatures that had managed to partially breach the door, but the metal barrier was dissolving rapidly. They had minutes at most before the office was overrun. "You want to create a technological symbiosis," Zephyr said, his voice filled with admiration. "Human understanding of the machines combined with dragon magic to awaken their dormant potential. It has never been attempted between our species." "There's a first time for everything," Kale said grimly. "And if it doesn't work, we're dead anyway." The Dragon Prince moved to stand beside him at the terminal. "What do you need me to do?" Kale's fingers continued to dance across the controls, establishing connections and activating dormant protocols. "I'm going to link every ship's computer to this terminal. When I give you the signal, channel your power through the system. Don't try to control the individual ships. Just awaken their core purpose, their reason for existing. And you will provide the technical interface," Zephyr said with understanding. "Your knowledge of human engineering combined with my ability to speak to the machine's essence." The door finally gave way completely, and a wave of void creatures poured into the office. Zephyr met them with a wall of golden fire, holding them back through sheer force of will. But Kale could see his friend weakening with each attack. "Almost ready," Kale said, sweat beading on his forehead as he worked. The chamber's computer systems were vast and complex, designed to coordinate hundreds of vehicles in emergency situations. Just need to bypass the authentication protocols, and the terminal chimed acceptance. And suddenly, Kale felt connected to every ship in the chamber. Through the network, he could sense their dormant systems, their waiting potential, their unfulfilled purpose. They had been built to protect humanity's expansion into space, to stand against threats that their creators could barely imagine. Now those threats were here, and the ships hungered for the chance to fulfill their design. "Now!" Kale shouted. Zephyr placed his claw against the terminal and released every ounce of his remaining power into the network. Golden energy flowed through the connections, speaking to each ship's central computer in the language of purpose and awakening. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Throughout the chamber, engines roared to life, weapon systems powered up, and navigation computers came online. But more than that, each ship began to remember what it was, why it had been built, and what it was meant to protect. The void creatures attacking the office suddenly found themselves facing not just a dragon prince and a human boy, but the awakened fury of Earth's sleeping guardians. Plasma cannons swiveled to track the shadow beings, missile systems acquired targets, and energy shields flickered into existence around the most vulnerable ships. What followed was less a battle than an extermination. The emergency response fleet had been designed to fight alien threats in hostile environments, and their weapon systems were perfectly suited to dealing with energy-based life forms. The Void creature's ability to phase between dimensions meant nothing against weapons that could fire in multiple dimensional phases simultaneously. Within minutes, the chamber was filled with the flash and thunder of military-grade weaponry. The organic Void ships tried to retreat, but the human vessels pursued them with relentless efficiency. Some of the enemy craft managed to escape through the chamber's ceiling access points, but most were destroyed before they could clear the facility. As the last echoes of weapons fire faded, Kale found himself standing in a chamber full of triumphant spacecraft, their engines humming with satisfaction at a job well done. Zephyr had collapsed from exhaustion, but his scales still glowed with the satisfaction of victory. "We did it," Kale said, hardly believing it himself. "We actually did it." But their celebration was interrupted by a new sound, the arrival of more ships, these ones descending through the ceiling with grace and majesty rather than the sinister flow of the Void craft. The newcomers were clearly dragon vessels, their hulls gleaming with scales and their engines breathing controlled fire. "The Imperial fleet," Zephyr said weakly, struggling to his feet. "My father has found me." The lead ship settled onto the chamber floor, and figures emerged that made Kale's breath catch. Even in humanoid form, it was clear these were beings of immense power and authority. The male was tall and commanding, with silver scales visible at his temples and eyes like molten gold. The female moved with predatory grace, her form radiating controlled lethality. Emperor Valerian and Empress Seraphina, Zephyr said formally, though Kale could hear the relief and love in his voice. "My parents." The reunion was everything Kale had expected, emotional, dramatic, and conducted in a language he didn't understand. But even without comprehending the words, he could feel the depth of the family's connection, the relief at finding their lost son, and the pride at what he had accomplished. When the initial greetings were finished, Emperor Valerian turned his attention to Kale. The dragon ruler studied the human boy with eyes that seemed to see through to his very soul. "So," Valerian said in accented but clear English, "you are the one who saved my son. The homeless human child who showed kindness to a lost dragon prince." Kale nodded, suddenly, very aware of his ragged clothes and unwashed appearance in the presence of galactic royalty. "Yes, sir. I mean, Your Majesty. He was hurt, and I couldn't leave him." Empress Seraphina smiled, and Kale saw where Zephyr had gotten his remarkable eyes. "Such simple words," she said, "but they carry the weight of worlds. Do you understand what your kindness has accomplished?" "I helped a friend," Kale said simply. "You prevented a war," Valerian corrected. "The Void Collective's attack was a test of our response capabilities. If they had succeeded in capturing Zephyr, they would have learned the locations of our defense stations and the timing of our patrol schedules. Their invasion would have caught us completely unprepared." The Emperor gestured to the awakened human ships around them. "Moreover, you have demonstrated something that will change the balance of power in this galaxy. Human-dragon technological symbiosis. Together, our species can create defenses that neither could achieve alone." Kale looked around at the chamber full of active spacecraft, each one a perfect fusion of human engineering and dragon magic. They hummed with potential, ready to defend not just Earth, but any world threatened by the Void Collective. "What happens now?" Kale asked. "Now," Zephyr said, moving to stand beside his new friend, "we offer you a choice. You could return to your old life if you wish. We would ensure you are well cared for, that you never want for anything. Or," Empress Seraphina added with a knowing smile, "you could come with us. Help us build a new kind of fleet, one that combines the best of human innovation with dragon wisdom. The Void Collective will return, but when they do, we will be ready. Kale looked around the chamber one more time. 3 days ago, he had been a forgotten, homeless boy, invisible to a society that had moved beyond him. Now he stood in the presence of galactic royalty, surrounded by the fruits of an impossible partnership between species. But, more than that, he had found something he had thought lost forever: family. In Zephyr, he had discovered not just a friend, but a brother. In the Dragon Royal family, he saw the possibility of belonging somewhere, of having a purpose beyond mere survival. "I'll come with you," he said without hesitation. "Zephyr saved my life just as much as I saved his. I'm not leaving him again." The Dragon Prince's answering smile was brighter than dragon fire, and Emperor Valerian nodded with approval. "Then, welcome to the Imperial Fleet, Admiral Kale of Earth. May your service honor both your species." As they prepared to leave Earth's hidden chamber, Kale took one last look at his old life. Somewhere above them, Marcus and his gang were probably still searching the tunnels, never knowing how close they had come to galactic catastrophe. The Undercity would continue its eternal struggle for survival, just as it always had. But now Earth had protectors watching over it, and humanity had proven itself worthy of standing alongside the greatest powers in the galaxy. A homeless boy's simple act of kindness had become the foundation for a new era of cooperation and hope. The dragon ships lifted into space, carrying their human ally toward adventures beyond imagination. Behind them, the awakened emergency fleet stood guard, ready to defend their homeworld against any threat. And in the depths of space, word spread that humanity had found its destiny among the stars, earned not through conquest or ambition, but through compassion and the unshakable determination to do what was right. The Void Collective would return, as such enemies always did. But when they came, they would find not the divided galaxy they expected, but a united force of humans and dragons fighting side by side. And at the heart of that alliance would be the bond between a homeless boy and a lost prince, proof that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could reshape the entire universe. Kale's journey from the streets of Earth to the halls of galactic power was complete, but his real adventure was just beginning. The boy who had offered his last piece of bread to a wounded stranger was about to help write a new chapter in the history of two civilizations, one that would echo across the stars for millennia to come.